Good morning, everyone. We are Group 5 and we are reporting about the respiratory system, the anatomy of the lungs, and the physiology of the lungs. And I have the photo about our respiratory system here. I hope you can see. The respiratory system brings oxygen to move carbon dioxide from the blood so that the heart can pump it out to the rest of the body and to all the cells. The respiratory system is the networks of organs and tissues that help you breathe. Include your airways, lungs, and blood vessels. The respiratory system performs the following functions. It takes up oxygen for transport in the blood to the cells. It expels carbon dioxide waste from cellular metabolism. It helps regulate acid-base balance through the bicarbonate buffer system. Anatomy of the respiratory conducting system. The respiratory conducting systems bring air to the respiratory portions. The respiratory and digestive systems are connected and share the conducting system of the mouth and throat. The mouth is conducting system to the larynx and moisturize air. The primary functions of the larynx in humans and other vertebrates is to protect the lower respiratory tract from aspirating food into the trachea while breathing. This is our larynx here. The nose is conducting system to the larynx. It moisturizes and warms air and removes particulate debris. The mouth and nose work together to provide backup volume and redundant source of air supply. The nose is lined with mucous membranes that have folds called turbinates or conchae. The turbinates provide extra surface area to warm and moisturize air. So we have difference of mucous membrane or the mucosa. It's also called mucous membranes. There's various type of mucosa. The nasal mucosa, oral mucosa, esophageal mucosa, bronchial mucosa, gastric mucosa, and also intestinal mucosa. Mucosa is another name of mucous membrane lines the inside of organs and cavities throughout our body that are exposed to particles from the outside. The mucus covering the turbinates is sticky and catches dirt and other foreign elements which are swallowed or blown out. The nasopharynx. Pharynx means gulp or throat, as the same functions. So what is nasopharynx? Nasopharynx is connected to our nasal passage to the rest of the respiratory system. This allows air to get from your nose to your lungs or to control pressure between your nasopharynx and middle ear. The oropharynx is the back of the mouth. The oropharynx, the middle part of the throat, connects to the oral cavity or the mouth. The epiglottis covers the trachea and during swallowing. Epiglottis is small, movable lid just above the larynx that prevent food and drink from entering your windpipe. The larynx is the voice box and functions of the produce sounds. So, This is our larynx here. The lips and tongues from the sounds into words, songs, and screams, but they do not produce sounds as such. The larynx is the midline of the neck, halfway between the clavicle and jaw. The thyroid cartilage is known as the Adam's apple. So, the thyroid cartilage is a protective shield from surrounding the anterior part of the larynx and span vertically from the superior to inferior regions.
Vocal folds, also known as vocal cords. These structures tighten and move toward the midline to produce sound by vibrating when air passes by them. Tighter tension results in higher pitch. The folds are tensed by intrinsic muscles in the voice box. The cricothyroid muscles move the larynx forward and down, raising the pitch of the voice. Ang vocal folds kilala po ni siya as a vocal cords. Mao ni siya ang dalawa ka bands of smooth muscle tissue. Matagpuan ni siya sa larynx. Ang vocal cords is ga-vibrate o ga-air passes sa pamamagitan ng cords na galing sa lungs and ga-produce siya og sound sa atong voice. Pleura and pleural spaces. The pleura are sacs made of strong connective tissue that line the chest wall, the parietal pleura, and the lungs, the visceral pleura. The inferior pulmonary ligament joins the pleura. The space between the parietal and visceral pleura is the pleural cavity. It is filled with a lubricating fluid. Mao ni siya ang example sa parietal pleura ug sa visceral pleura. Ang pleura kay galing sa strong connect sa tissue which is ga-line sa chest wall or ginatawag nato na parietal pleura. Then sa lungs naman kay the visceral pleura. Anatomy of conduction portion. The trachea is tubular structure just beneath the larynx. It is made of stacked rings of cartilage with fibrous spaces. It divides the upper chest into the right and left mainstem bronchi. The mainstem bronchi carry gases to the right and left lungs. They divide into smaller and smaller segmental bronchi. The whole is called the tracheobronchial tree. The bronchi divide finally into bronchioles, small bronchi. Sa trachea is gidivide siya into right and left main stem bronchi. Then sa main stem bronchi is gidivide po siya into smaller and smaller segmental bronchi. Tapos, mo ni siya ginatawag na tracheobronchial tree. Then sa lungs is gidivide siya into lobes. Mani siya ang upper, middle, and lower. Then, ang kaninga lobes is gidivide siya by fissures into segments. Ang segments is gaserve siya by the smaller division of the bronchi. Clinical application. The larynx, the trachea, the bronchi. In their smaller division perform pulmonary ventilation, which is simply the movement of air. The bronchioles and alveoli perform pulmonary respiration, which is the exchange of gases.
My name is Debicate Nunes, reporting. The anatomy of the respiratory portion. Bronchioles and the conducting system, and alveolar ducts, alveolar sacs, and alveoli begin the respiratory exchange portion. Alveolar ducts is direct air from the bronchioles into the alveolar sacs. The alveolar sacs are clumps of alveoli with a common opening. Alveoli. Alveoli are the home of pulmonary respiration. And as you can see, alveoli duct is at the top of alveoli. Alveolar ducts are lined by simple cuboidal cells. They are sacs of many alveoli, which are the cells that exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide in the lung. So there are 7 descriptions of about The alveoli are the home of pulmonary respiration. At the top of the list is exchange of gases occurs in alveoli. Secondly, the alveolar ducts direct air from the bronchioles into the alveolar sacs. Next, alveolar sacs are clumps of alveoli with a common opening. Next, each alveolus is only one cell thick. Next, pulmonary capillaries are directly next to alveolar cells and they also are only one cell thick. Next, carbon dioxide passes from the pulmonary capillary bed into the blood. Next, emphysema breaks down the walls between sacs and reduces the amount of gas that can be exchanged. Pulmonary ventilation is simply the movement of air. Pulmonary respiration is both the movement of air and the exchange of gases with the blood. Clinical application. Clinical application is a diseases such as asthma can cause the bronchioles to close, trapping air inside the lungs and preventing respiration. Also, damage to the tracheal and bronchial cilia can prevent foreign matter from being ejected, causing disease. So basically, the respiratory system is responsible for taking an oxygen and expelling carbon dioxide. And it is how we breathe. So if a person has an asthma, there is tendency that the oxygen that we breathe in will be not properly circulated in all parts of our body, so that it causes the bronchioles to close and preventing the respiration of the oxygen. And that's all about of the respiratory system, anatomy of the lungs. And let's proceed to the respiratory system, physiology of the lungs. In our continuing study of the respiratory system, we examine the four areas in which respiration occurs and the consequences of blocking this respiration. We review the physiology of the movement of gases into the lungs and of their exchange with waste gases in the blood at the level of alveoli. Finally, we turn to the central respiratory centers that control the pace of respiration, and we examine some common respiratory disorder and their treatment.
There are four areas of respiration. First, in pulmonary ventilation, room or outside, air is taken into the body. Room air is about 80% nitrogen and 20% oxygen with trace gases. Second, external pulmonary respiration involves the external of gases within the lungs in the blood of capillaries of alveoli. Third, internal tissue involves the exchange of gases between cells and blood in the capillaries. Cellular respiration involves a metabolic process within the cell. Of inspiration is taking air into the lungs, and the expiration is pushing air out of the lungs. Also, the term of expiration, it means to die. Of gases. When the mouth and nose are open, the air pressure in the lungs equals the atmospheric pressure. The pressure of the space between the visceral and parietal pleura is slightly less than the atmospheric pressure. Ginapasabot sa movement of gases kay ang kapag ma-open ang atong mouth and nose, makalanghap tag atmospheric pressure or hangin sa gawa sa atong lawas. Contacts the diaphragm and increasing the diameter of the thoracic cavity, decreasing the pressure between the lungs and the parietal pleura. The lower pressure of the pleural space draws air into the lungs. On expiration, relaxation of diaphragm pressure in the pleural space and expels air from the lungs. Expansion and contraction of the flexible ribs and chest aid. Inspiration and expiration. Also, kapag mag-expire ang paghinga sa diaphragm, magtaas ang presyon sa pleural space at naglalabas ng hangin mula sa baga. Accessory muscles of respiration aid in times of pulmonary stress such as during exercise. First, the external intercostal muscles connect the ribs and the collarbone, pulling the ribs up during respiration. Second, the external doxmastoid muscle help raise the first rib sternum and collarbone by pulling against the head. Third, the scalene muscle also pull the ribs up against the collarbone. Fourth, rectus abdominis and internal intercostal muscle pull the ribs down, aiding expiration. So, ang ginapasabot aning the accessory muscles of respiration kay mao daw ni siya ang makatabang in times of pulmonary stress or during exercise.
Tracheobronchial tree. What is tracheobronchial tree? The tracheobronchial tree is composed of the trachea, the bronchi, and the bronchioles that transport air from the environment to the lungs for gas exchange. Cilia in the lining cells of the upper airway beat toward the mouth to remove small foreign material. So, the function of cilia is to move water relative to the cell in a regular movement of the cilia. Therefore, the process can either result in the cell moving through the water, typical for many single-cell organisms, or in moving water in its contents across the surface of the cell. Loss of cilia does double harm to smokers because secretions cannot be cleared and carcinogens stay in contact with the lining cells longer. If mawala imong silya, doble ang pinsala sa nanggapanigaro ani kay walay magsala silang mga ginalanghap nga hangin. So dira ka dako ang cause nga magkalang cancer ka. A foreign body impact here may be rapidly fatal. It is hard to gain emergency access. Example, include the intake of water during drowning or the aspiration of vomit. Center control of respiration. What is center control of respiration? This central control is both conscious and unconscious, voluntary and involuntary. Breath can be controlled to a great extent but not to the point of death. There are several centers of respiratory control, all of which are driven by small changes in blood chemistry. The medullary rhythmicity center establishes the basic normal rhythm, 12 to 15 breaths per minute at rest. It has separate inspiratory and expiratory centers. The apneustic area controls breath holding. Pneumothorax areas regulate the brain's coordination of respiration. Pneumothorax, air in the chest. Why we call this air in the chest? Cause pneu means air, thorax means chest. What is pneumothorax? A pneumothorax is a collapsed lung. A pneumothorax occurs when air leaks into the space between your lung and chest wall. This air pushes on the outside of your lung and makes it collapse. A pneumothorax can be a complete lung collapse or a collapse of only a portion of the lung. Symptoms of pneumothorax: sharp, stabbing chest pain that worst when trying to breathe in, shortness of breath, bleached skin caused by a lack of oxygen, fatigue, rapid breathing and heartbeat, a dry hacking cough. Three types of pneumothorax: closed pneumothorax, open pneumothorax, and tension pneumothorax. Open pneumothorax results from a penetrating thoracic injury that permits entry of air into the chest. Closed pneumothorax is the accumulation of air originating from the respiratory system within the pleural space. Attention pneumothorax is a served condition that results when air is trapped in the pleural space under positive pressure, displacing mediastinal structures and compromising cardiopulmonary function.